So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, whether you are joining live or whether you will be watching later. I just want to welcome you to this Learning Lab number 5 that focuses on going from comfort to courage, meaning beyond the surface. So thank you so much, Grace, for this wonderful invitation and for crafting this really important language in the title. Here's an overview of how we will spend our time together this afternoon. I'm going to start by just providing a background of my work. From there, I'm going to discuss some of my research on meaning in life. After that, I'm going to discuss some implications for professionals and leaders, and then we will end with next steps and closing thoughts. So, as Grace mentioned, my name is Janelle Goodwill. I earned my PhD in social work and psychology from the University of Michigan. And so Grace and I actually met when we were both working on our master's degrees at University of Michigan. I was doing a master's in social work degree. Grace, being the just outstanding achiever that she is, was earning a master's in social work and a master's in public health at the same time, y'all. So she is a woman who knows what she's talking about, okay? So we were both master's students at the same time, and since then have just formed this really beautiful sisterhood that has spanned over a decade at this point. I joined the faculty at the University of Chicago in July of 2020. Folks can think back to what was going on at that time. You can imagine that was a very difficult time to move to a new city, start a new job. The pandemic was still in its very early stages, and it was just really tough to make that transition. But I have still been able to really advance my work and launch my career here. I use a mix of qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods research approaches in the work that I do, which shapes and informs the way that I go about understanding the data. And I'm going to share some of those data with you today. And for several years before joining the faculty, I worked under the leadership of my former advisor, Dr. Daphne Watkins at University of Michigan. And I was the project manager for a intervention that focused on Black men's mental health and masculinity. And so even in the context of meaning, I have spent a lot of time thinking about the experiences of particular groups and thinking about the ways that their experiences of meaning can shape their mental health and overall well-being outcomes. Since coming to Chicago, I've started to focus pretty explicitly on creating interventions that serve Black youth here in Chicago. There's a lot of really negative things said about Black Chicagoans and Black youth in Chicago, and so our work is really trying to support the mental health needs of this particular population. I've also spent a lot of time thinking about Black adults' mental health during COVID. We recognize, and I'm sure you all have seen this as leaders, that COVID continues to be an ongoing concern and has fundamentally shifted the way that we understand and relate to one another. And so as a researcher, I grow concerned when we try to just move forward and pretend it didn't happen, just try to forget that this major, major epidemic happened across the globe. Many of us lost people that we cared about. Some of us have continued to experience serious injuries since then. But in terms of leadership, the way that we understand work and our relation to work has also shifted since COVID, and that's important to highlight. For the purposes of today, though, I'm going to spend most of my time discussing a lot of the work that I do that focuses on positive psychology. And so we can understand positive psychology as really being an effort to focus on what is going well, what's happening that's good in the individual's life, and how can we harness that to promote better outcomes over time. And so my work really does center these questions around measuring things like joy and gratitude and hope. And today in particular, I'm going to focus and sharing some of my research that focuses on meaning in life. Okay. So thank you again for joining. Now, my work on meaning in life takes a few different shapes and forms. What I have here is a screenshot from the website that you can go to if you're interested in learning more about my work. Alongside my work as a professor at the University of Chicago, I also lead a research team. This research team is called the Positive Urban Research and Prevention of Suicide Experiences Lab. It's the Purpose Lab. So hence the name, meaning and purpose. I really just find great meaning in that. And so I have decided to name our research team the Purpose Lab. And so you can go to our website by going to the-purpose-lab.com. And here you're going to be able to learn more about the different projects that we lead, the work we're doing in the community, and then also seeing some of my team members. I'll talk about my experience in leading this team more throughout our presentation. I also think about meaning in the context of very serious occurrences like mental health and suicide prevention. In my work as a suicide prevention researcher, I think a lot about the role of meaning and purpose and how that can be protective in an individual's life. And so I've written about this with my colleagues for different news outlets. So this article was published in 2024 in the Chicago Sun-Times, which is a really well-read paper here in the Chicago area. In this article, we focused on really trying to amplify the fact that young Black and Latino Chicago men were dying by suicide at increasing rates, and that really deserves our immediate attention and action. I've also written about gun violence and its connection to questions around meaning in life for Black male populations. And this article was published in the Chicago Tribune later that year. And I'm happy to make these articles available to people who may not have subscriptions to these news outlets. But again, these questions of meaning and purpose in life, for me, have taken shape within the context of hardship, of difficulty that people may face. And I think that could be relevant to your role as leaders in thinking about how can an individual form a sense of meaning and purpose, even in the midst of difficulty and hardship. And so this is where a lot of my work has been situated and trying to understand a local context here in Chicago. My work has, I'm grateful that my work has been featured in not just local, but also national news outlets. PBS NewsHour came and did a story on my research study, and they came to campus in 2024. And not only did they highlight my research, but they also highlighted the work of some important community partners. And so again, if you watch this segment, you're going to see conversations about meaning and hope and the positive psychology research that I've done. This is a screenshot of me during the interview. You can see I have on a pink blazer there. Today I have on a pink sweater. Clearly, I'm a pink girl, but I think it's important and worthwhile to consider just checking out this news outlet and broadcast, which provides a deeper conversation about some of the ways I'm thinking about hope and hopelessness and other experiences of mental health and meaning here in Chicago. Now, as we move forward throughout our conversation today, I thought it was important to really begin our time by highlighting a passage from the Old Testament that I use and really spend a lot of time meditating over and mulling over in my work. And so this is a passage from the book of Psalms. It's Psalm 16:11, read from the NIV version. And I'll read it aloud here just for you before I delve deeper. And so Psalm 16:11 says, "You make known to me the path of life. You fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand." And so for me, this is an important passage because it confirms to me that I don't need to go searching across all these different outlets to find the path that I'm supposed to take. That really I can find the path and the direction, the clarity that I need in this place of prayer as I'm seeking wisdom from the Lord to know what to do and to know how to move forward. And also, I can find great joy in the presence of the Lord. And as I continue to read the text and to mull over what's shared here, I find great encouragement and joy that ultimately helps me to do my work efficiently and effectively. All of us are experiencing, I'm sure, different forms of stressors, and being able to find joy, being able to find direction and clarity in the work that I do is essential for me as a researcher, as a professor, as a leader of people and teams, because without those things, I would not be effective. And so, for me, Psalm 16:11 has been really transformative in my understanding of how to move forward, where to go, what to do, and I would encourage you to check out this passage for yourself as well. Okay, as we move forward, I think it's important for me to do some grounding and explaining first what is meaning in life. There may be many definitions or maybe sorts of terminology that people may find to be helpful, but I think turning to the work of Viktor Frankl and other researchers like Michael Steger and colleagues has been really helpful for me as I try to put language and add some teeth to the work that I'm doing in meaning in life. So, meaning in life could be described as the sense made of and the significance felt regarding the nature of one's being in existence. So, this definition comes from an article published in the Journal of Counseling Psychology in 2006, published by Michael Steger and colleagues. Meaning in life is important because it is consistently related to better mental health, better academic outcomes, and better well-being outcomes. So in short, people who have a strong sense of meaning in life essentially are experiencing an enhanced quality of life, greater longevity, improved physical health and mental health, and even for children and young adults, improve academic outcomes. Researchers like Michael Steger and colleagues have typically measured meaning in life across two separate domains: the search and the presence of meaning in life. There's positive psychologists like Viktor Frankl, whose work has really been foundational to the study of meaning. And so Viktor Frankl wrote this book, initially published in the 1950s. And in this book, he recounts his experience as a survivor of the Holocaust. He was imprisoned in different concentration camps, and he's a Jewish psychiatrist, and he wrote this book, the first of many books, but he wrote this book called Man's Search for Meaning that continues to be a bestseller even today. And so I'm not sure if you've had the chance to read this book, but this book has, for me, been incredibly helpful in trying to understand what meaning is and how it forms. Throughout the book, Viktor Frankl, I think, continuously encourages readers to come back to this question of how do we find meaning and purpose in the midst of suffering? Here's a picture of Viktor Frankl later in his life. He lived from 1905 to 1997. Now, for me, aside from understanding the work of psychologists and psychiatrists and researchers, I also look to the experiences of formerly enslaved persons like Harriet Jacobs, like Ivy Wells Barnett, and even like Frederick Douglass. When you read the narrative of Frederick Douglass, he has a few that he's published, but his first autobiography, The Narrative of Frederick Douglass, in this book, he describes finding meaning and purpose and believing that there was something to live for even beyond the hardship he was facing in that time. So 1845, he published this book, and I'm just going to read this direct quotation here, where he says, "I date the entertainment of a deep conviction that slavery would not always be able to hold me within its foul embrace. And in the darkest hours of my career in slavery, this living word of faith and the spirit of hope departed not from me, but remained like ministering angels to cheer me through the gloom. This good spirit was from God, and to him I offer thanksgiving and praise." So here, Frederick Douglass is writing very powerfully and explaining that even in this time where he experienced the worst forms of human abuse and torture, being an enslaved person, during this period of American history, that even still he believed that there was something worth living for. He believed in hope, and he believed in faith, and he believed that there was something beyond this moment that he needed to hold on to. And so I want to encourage all of us, whatever hardships we may be facing right now, if we can draw from the strength of people like a Frederick Douglass or even a Viktor Frankl, people who experienced the worst forms of human atrocity, and still were able to find meaning and still were able to offer important contributions in serving humanity and the world, then certainly you and I can endure whatever difficulties we may be facing right now as leaders in the places where we've been placed in this time. Now, moving forward, I want to encourage you to think about, and I want to introduce you to some of the ways that researchers go about understanding and measuring meaning in life. And so again, this scale comes from Michael Steger and colleagues, published in 2006. Here, they measure meaning in life across the two domains that I mentioned earlier: presence in life and search for meaning in life. So questions that represent people who feel a sense of presence of meaning in life are things like, I understand my life's meaning, my life has a clear sense of purpose, and I have discovered a satisfying life purpose. Okay? Those who are searching for meaning in life may be wrestling with questions like, I'm looking for something that makes my life feel meaningful, or I am seeking a purpose or a mission in my life, or I'm searching for my meaning in life. Okay, so we're going to come back to these questions a little bit later, but I just want to introduce you to them now because these are the ways that researchers like myself may go about administering these questions to people who complete surveys, who participate in our research studies. Now, as a leader, I want to encourage you to consider this first question, and I have a few of these throughout the presentation. So as a leader, I want to encourage you to consider this question: why might it be particularly important to help cultivate a sense of meaning and purpose in this current moment for your group or your organization in this time? Okay. I drew from historical examples like Viktor Frankl, who was imprisoned in different concentration camps, and for Frederick Douglass, who was enslaved during a very dark and incredibly depressing time in American history. And while we've certainly made advances since those times, there are still many concerns that people face today. So there is skepticism around science, around facts. There is environmental stressors and concerns around natural disasters, whether it's hurricane or tornadoes. There's concerns clearly around immigration, people being detained and deported, or even people living in fear and being afraid to even leave their homes. During this time, we've also seen global events and wars escalate to a new level. All of these things speak to the challenges that you might face as a leader in trying to help people develop or cultivate a sense of meaning and purpose. Now, this time, I would like to draw from some examples of my own research where I have been able to think about the ways that meaning and purpose can help improve an individual's well being and outcomes. So, first, I published a study in 2023 in the journal American Psychologist. This study is titled Purpose in the Pandemic: Fear of COVID-19, Hopelessness, Meaning in Life, and Suicidal Thoughts Among Two Samples of Black Americans. And so, in this study, I collected data from people in 2020 and I collected data from people again in 2022, two different samples. And in these studies, I asked them to share how hopeless they are and to also share how much meaning and purpose they felt, along with asking them to report their recent experiences of mental health outcomes. And so the first sample included responses from about 489 people, whereas the second sample included responses from about 794 people. And so we looked at the results across the two samples, and we found some really important findings. Here, I just want to show you this graph, and I'll explain what this means. Horizontally across the bottom, that's called the x-axis, we have scores on hopelessness. So you can see people's scores on hopelessness can increase from 1 to 4. Vertically, that's called the y-axis. We have their experiences of suicide ideation. How often have they considered ending their life most recently? And so that score can go anywhere from 5 to 30. Okay. And then we also have this other variable that's called the presence of meaning in life. And so we just read about that a little bit ago. And so here, what we see from this graph is that people on the black line, this black slope here that I want to highlight for you, people on this black line, those represent people who have the lowest scores on meaning in life. However, people who represent the purple line, they have about average scores of presence of meaning in life. And then people with pink, this pink line represents people who have the highest scores of meaning in life. Okay? So what this figure tells us is that even when people are experiencing a lot of hopelessness, their risk of experiencing suicidal ideation decreases if they have a strong sense of presence of meaning in life. Okay, let me repeat that again. When people are experiencing a lot of hopelessness, if they have a strong sense of presence of meaning in life, then that risk of experiencing suicidal ideation goes down. However, the risk of suicidal ideation increases for people who are reporting a lower sense of meaning in life. So by this, we can see that there's what's called a buffering or a moderating effect here, where having a sense of presence of meaning in life can help protect someone against suicidal ideation, even if they are feeling very hopeless or very discouraged in this time. If I were to go back to the slide that I just showed you, we could see many reasons why people might be feeling hopeless, whether it's around immigration issues or around the global wars or even around job loss, financial insecurity, job instability. There's many reasons why the companies that you all lead, why the communities you serve, or even the people that you hire in your organizations may be feeling hopeless. But if we can help instill a sense of presence or meaning in life, then we can help, I think, help them to believe that there is something worth living for and ultimately improve mental health outcomes. In a second study that was published in the Journal of Youth and Adolescence in 2024, my colleague Meredith Hope and I examined these relationships between religion and suicide and also meaning in life amongst a sample of young adults, 18 to 25-year-olds. What we found is that it was these like personal forms of devotion. So things like maybe reading religious texts, listening to religious music, or even prayer was positively linked to feelings of hope and presence of meaning in life, and also searching for meaning in life, okay? So here we found that people who reported that they most often listened to religious music or prayed more or listened to or read religious texts, that they were reporting more hope. They were reporting a greater sense of meaning in life, but they were also searching for meaning in life as well. And so this is where considering the developmental stages is important to think about too. People who are younger, like young adults, are still very much searching for who they are and deciding who they want to be. People who are later in life, though, may feel much more settled in their purpose or meaning in life, and they may feel much more fulfilled. And so depending on the groups and organizations that you all really interact with, you may think about the stage in which people find themselves and considering whether they're still searching or whether they actually may be feeling more settled in their work and in their career. And then additionally, I'm highlighting findings from a third study that I published in 2024, where I was interested in understanding what helps people believe that that they are hopeful and that they can also experience joy. And so in this study, I was interested in identifying predictors of hope and joy amongst Black Americans during the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, so my framing was that COVID has been a very difficult time and that there's been a lot of loss, a lot of death, mortality, and hardship. Even still, some people have found ways to remain hopeful and to still experience joy. And I was interested in understanding what factors might contribute to that. And so we found in this study here that having a sense of presence of meaning in life was the strongest contributor to joy, even when accounting for financial hardship, when accounting for loneliness, when accounting for fear of the pandemic, when accounting for job loss. Having a sense of presence of meaning in life was still the greatest contributor to increased feelings of joy. And so, as you all think about your roles as leaders of organizations and as leaders of people, it is essential that individuals that you hire, that you serve, that you train, and the communities that you actually work with through your organization, it's important that people feel that they have a sense of meaning in life because that can enhance their quality of life and also lead to increased feelings of joy. Okay, so now I want to just do a quick check-in activity. Okay, so I have done a lot of talking so far, but I think it could be good for you all to spend some time looking over the questions from this scale. This is called the Meaning in Life Questionnaire, published in 2006. Okay? I want you to take some time to look through each of the questions here and to answer each question for yourself. Okay? There's 10 questions that represent the presence of meaning in life and also the search for meaning in life. And I want to encourage you to look through each question and to answer using the scale option listed here. Do you feel that the question listed here is absolutely untrue or absolutely true? You can range from 1 to 7, understanding that there are points in between that go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? I want to encourage you to take a few minutes to read what's listed here. All right. When you look at the questions under the presence of meaning in life section, you'll see that, again, there's questions that ask things like, do you understand the meaning of your life? Or do you feel that your life has a clear sense of purpose? Or do you feel that you've discovered a satisfying life purpose? Do you have a good sense of what makes your life meaningful? Conversely, we have the search for meaning in life. And questions in that section may ask things like, I'm always looking to find my life's purpose, or I'm seeking a purpose or mission for my life. What I want to highlight is that in both sections, there might be questions that are reverse scored. And so that means that you would just do the opposite scoring for that scale item there. But I want to encourage you as a leader, as a person who supervises individuals and teams. I want to encourage you to answer these questions and to see where you are for yourself, okay? Do find yourself in response to these questions. Do you think that you may be doing more searching for meaning in this season? Or might you be experiencing maybe more presence of meaning in life during this time? I want to encourage you to spend some time really sitting with those questions and thinking about, are you doing more searching? Or do you feel a greater sense of presence? Are you somewhere in between? It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, just one or the other. You could be across really a continuum, but thinking about how where you are as a leader of an organization or company could shape the way that you go about actually building your company, I think could be really important as you move forward in your work. Now, I want to spend some time highlighting how meaning actually shows up in my work as a professor. So, I feel that as a professor, I have been entrusted to lead different groups of people. One of the main parts of my job is teaching, but that's not the only part of my job. That's one area where I think there might be a common misconception. Professors do not spend all day lecturing. Instead, we actually spend really a majority of our time doing research, particularly those of us who are working at research intensive universities. And so we spend a great deal of our time doing research, which means that we have to draw in different skills beyond just having knowledge and instruction. So I teach a lot of master students. Again, I'm a professor in a school of social work. And so we oftentimes have master students who come to campus for 2 years, sometimes even less, and then they leave. And so thinking about how meaning shows up in the life of someone who's going to be pretty transient and who's only going to be there for a short time is something that I continue to work through and wrestle with. PhD students, however, relate to faculty very differently because PhD students are typically working on their doctoral degrees for 5+ years. Okay, so that's a completely different relationship than a master student who's typically in a professional degree. They're there for a truncated amount of time and they go off in their career and go impact the field. PhD students, however, are being trained to be scholars. They're being trained to be our peers in the academy. And so the way that meaning in life shows up for PhD students is very different because their connection to the university and to the faculty is incredibly different, and it requires much more constant communication. I also teach undergraduate classes. So those are students who are typically on campus for approximately 4 or 5 years sometimes. And these students are very much trying to figure out their next steps. They're trying to figure out who they want to be in the world, what careers they want to pursue, what interests they have. And so undergraduate students thinking about the way that meaning is shaping and forming their experiences on campus is important to consider as well. And then lastly, I have full-time and I've also had part-time staff that work with me that help me to conduct the research projects that I lead, particularly the research projects in the community. And so those are different forms of engagement. When someone is working with me 40 hours a week versus if they're working maybe 19 and a half hours a week, those are very different forms of engagement. And so considering the way that meaning shows up for full-time versus part-time employees is important to think about too. You may find yourself as someone who is hiring both maybe full-time, part-time, volunteer people, internships. And so considering the way that meaning is uniquely forming in all of those roles and positions, I think will be critical in enhancing really the effectiveness of your organization. Now, I also think it's worthwhile to consider the integration of meaning into the classes that I teach. So I teach an Introduction to Research Methods course. So typically students are not excited about this class. They don't understand why they have to take it, and it's a required class. But in that class, I try to explain to them that it's important for them to understand how to read a research study, so that they can have more knowledge, more insight, and so that they can then translate those findings for others who don't have the same opportunity and access to resources as we do being affiliated with the university. I also teach a class for future clinicians, so people who are going to go and be clinical social workers. I teach a clinical research methods class where I help them understand the way that research is essential to supporting the mental health of vulnerable populations. Whether you're working with children, teens, older adults, whether you're working with people across different race and ethnic groups, different age groups, different cultures, the way that we understand mental health and working to improve an individual's mental health is really all rooted in what research findings say and what research findings report. So it is critical that mental health professionals like myself and mental health researchers like myself really do understand how to develop research studies that can help improve and enhance an individual's well-being. So I spend a lot of time thinking about meaning in life in that context there. Then lastly, I teach a class on Introduction to Black Psychology for undergraduate students. When you think about the experiences of Black Americans generally, particularly Black Americans in Chicago, that class becomes really essential in trying to help students recognize that meaning enhances the well-being of populations and groups, and meaning can be used as we try to understand the way that we relate to one another. And so meaning and purpose shows up in my Black psychology class as well. Now, as we come to a close, I want to spend some time helping you think about how meaning is relevant for your work as a leader. Okay? So, how does having a sense of meaning or purpose in life actually show up in your work? In what ways are these values reflected in your mission statement? Okay? So, thinking about meaning and purpose in life, how does that show up in your work and how is it reflected in your mission statement? At this point, I want to encourage you to revisit the work of Viktor Frankl. So, Viktor Frankl, again, he's living under extreme torture and duress. And in that time, he's able to see that people will persevere, people will be resilient, people will continue to be strong in the face of adversity, so that they can live, so that they can flourish, so that they can really support others around them. And so Viktor Frankl's work, I think, is really helpful for leaders because he poses these three considerations. So he says that meaning can be formed by one, creating work or doing a deed. Okay. So when you think about how to cultivate a sense of meaning in your organization, you could think about doing this at the individual level by creating work or doing a deed. If you've created an organization, if you've created a business, then you've already done this. You've already created some form of work that people can be a part of, or by actually performing a service or work for someone else, or by doing a deed. Okay. Another way that leaders can go about thinking about how they can infuse meaning into what they do is that they can experience something or encounter someone. Okay. So Viktor Frankl suggests that meaning can be formed when we experience something or when we encounter someone. When you think about the services you provide, you want to give people an experience. Okay. You also want them to encounter you and your staff as people who are dynamic, who are engaged, who are attentive. And so, in those circumstances, a sense of meaning and purpose can be formed when people are having an experience or when they have a powerful encounter. And then the third way that Viktor Frankl suggests that meaning can be formed and the way that it can translate to your work as a leader is that we can really focus on the attitude that we take towards unavoidable suffering. Here in the West, our theology of suffering, I think, is pretty limited in scope and not always robust. But if we can look to history, I think that we will be much better positioned to withstand the hardship that is to come, friends. Okay, we will be better positioned to withstand the hardship that is to come if we really think carefully about the attitude that we take towards unavoidable suffering. In your role as a leader of people and in your role as leading an organization, there will be suffering that comes, whether that means loss of profit, whether that means having to end contracts, whether that means having to shrink or grow your business, whether that means having to shift away from priorities that you initially identified. But Frankl suggests that it's the attitude that you take towards the suffering that can help develop meaning. And if your employees can see that you handle meaning or handle suffering in a way that promotes meaning and cultivates meaning, that can shape their life moving forward. Now, I want to encourage you as a leader to reorient your approach to your work by beginning your process, beginning your efforts, beginning your day, and beginning your services from a place of meaning. How might you go about working from a place of meaning? I think that one, you could consider shifting the way that you serve your clients. Working from a place of meaning could shift the way that you serve your clients. Okay? Whoever your product or business is designed to serve, if you can serve them from a place of meaning, I think that will create a sense of loyalty from your clients, but also a sense of camaraderie and care, where your clients will not think that they are just money or that they're not just dollar signs or revenue for you, but instead they know that you've created a product with care that actually enhances the quality of their life. And so working from a place of meaning, I think, is an important consideration because one, it can shift the way that you serve your clients. I think it two could also shape the way that you give feedback to your staff. So if you as a leader are working from a place of meaning, then you want to give feedback to your staff in a way that's affirming, that's encouraging, that's instructive, that's clear, that's consistent, and that is not discouraging or demeaning. Okay? So if you work from a place of meaning, then you know, and your staff knows that you all are working towards a common goal. And by working towards that common goal, you're going to give feedback in a way that's going to help push them towards that goal, not detract from it. And that allows people, I think, to be able to receive feedback, I think, in a more thoughtful and mature way. Because I'm sure we can all remember times when maybe we received feedback from someone who dealt with us harshly instead of dealing with us in a way that was thoughtful and considerate. So as a leader, I want to encourage you to consider working from a place of meaning because it can shape the way that you also engage and interact with your staff. And then lastly, I think that working from a place of meaning can shift and help you think about the way that you relate to other leaders in your networks or even in your spheres of influence. So we know that comparison is a thief of joy and that oftentimes, especially in this age of social media, that it becomes really easy to focus on what Ken and what Keisha or what Barbara are doing, okay? When really we need to keep our eyes focused on what we are doing. And I think that if you decide today that you're going to work from a place of meaning, then you can better relate to other people in your network because you're not trying to compete with them. You're not trying to do what they're doing. You are focused on doing what you've been called to do. And you know you've been called to do it because it's formed out of a place of meaning, not from a place of scarcity or neglect or even jealousy or envy, but it's coming from a place of meaning. And that place of meaning is going to shine through as you interact with your peers, even in ways where maybe you all can collaborate instead of competing against one another moving forward. All right. So I began with a passage and I'm going to end with this passage. This passage is from Philippians chapter 1, verse 6, where it says that we can be confident of this, that he who began a good work in you will carry it to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. So, whatever idea the Lord has given you, no matter how big or how small, I believe that the Lord will bring that good work to completion. I think identifying and naming your work as good, declaring it to be good work, and recognizing that when you work from a place of meaning and wholeness, that it will lead to servicing people in a way that honors them, in a way that enhances their well being, in a way that will also support you and your team moving forward. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions now. Thank you.
Not just the West, but globally, many people are sensing, a sense of hopelessness in the
Yeah.
world. And as leaders, whether that is on the micro level, on the macro level, how would you say, even if you're not a person of faith, how would you say you can go about cultivating that meaning for people who may be asking questions of, what's happening in the world, and how to position them to still be successful in life when everything feels like it's falling apart?
Sure, sure. So I would say, I didn't even recognize I was choosing this mug, but this says stay grounded. Okay. And so I think that that could be a helpful first step is if you can implement some routines in your day that allow you to stay grounded, that even when you maybe get knocked off your square, but if
Mhm.
you know you have your routine in place, you can be better positioned to deal with the stress that comes. So maybe that means you have a routine where each day you begin by nurturing your body, engaging with nature outside, going for a walk. If you can plan your meals, if you can prioritize structure and order in your day, I think that that will help you to stay grounded and to have a sense of controlling what you can control. I mean, the reality is there are many things we cannot control. But if you are intentional in doing what you can do, I think that that could be just one helpful practical step in really trying to have a sense of normalcy and order in your life.
Mm,
Secondly, I think most importantly is if you go back to the three things that I ended with in terms of Viktor Frankl's work for developing meaning. So, one, starting with a deed, doing a deed or service for others. That is a very practical step for developing a sense of meaning or hope. When we take the attention off of ourselves and focus it towards others, research does demonstrate that that can help support improved well-being and health outcomes. I think also continuing to think about how you can maintain your sense of community. So are you going to be someone who withdraws or retreats, when hardship comes, or are you going to be intentional in cultivating community, whether it's really being intentional like within your team, developing new strategies, habits, ways of connecting, or even forming new networks, right? So, in this time, it could be really great for leaders and founders to develop new networks with people who are also beginning or launching a business. And that could be a really helpful way to develop and cultivate a sense of hope and connection by reaching out and learning and building with other people who are in that same stage. And then
mm,
lastly, I think reading the work of people who came before us. I mean, this is, I think, one of the easiest and most practical ways to develop a sense of hope and meaning in life is to read the stories of those who had to endure things a million times harder than we did
mm,
and learning from them, reading their words,
mm.
learning from their testimonies. I think whether you're a person of faith or not, you can learn something from Frederick Douglass. You can learn something from Viktor Frankl, right? Looking to those who came before us and reading what they learned, I think can help form a sense of hope and cultivate meaning in our lives.
I mean, so powerful. I mean, I think, Dr. Goodwill, one thing that we talk about a lot here at Swally is that as part of our model is that in order to not just reform as people, but that we must also take that reformation and
Yeah.
place it into the world. So that means
Certainly.
by being integrated into our communities and supporting our communities. So I just think that is so critical. And somebody just asked this question. I think it's kind of in alignment with what I asked, right? You know, what would you say to someone who cannot even think about meaning in life because they have no hope for life? I mean, I think you covered it, but I feel like this is,
Yeah.
a question that could probably reach so many people who can't even imagine the idea of meaning because they don't believe they are supposed to be on this earth, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a reality, right? And there's many people who feel that way. And my work focuses on suicide prevention. And so I think about these sorts of questions a lot because it's very hard to reach someone who does not have any hope, who feels that their life has no meaning, who've been convinced that they're a burden to others, and who ultimately believe that things would be better and that others would be better if they were not here. It's very difficult to try to reach someone who has gotten to that point, because sometimes we may feel that our words are not landing well. But I go back to what I just shared. I think that if an individual is at a place where they simply don't have that sense of hope and meaning within themselves, then I would turn them to the work of other people. I would turn them to history, right? Like, we can learn from people who came before us. So I would encourage them to read Man's Search for Meaning. I would encourage them to read the autobiography of Ida B. Wells Barnett. I would encourage them to read Frederick Douglass's narrative of Frederick Douglass. I would encourage them to read Innocence, the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. These are people who all endured the most heinous forms of suffering, and yet they hoped. That's a direct quotation from Harriet Jacobs. You know, she hid in an attic for 7 years to get away from her enslaver who was abusing her physically and sexually. She hid in an attic for 7 years. The attic was like 3 feet high. There would be rats crawling over her body. Okay? She couldn't see her kids for 7 years because she was trying to get out of slavery. She eventually made it north, and so did her kids. But in her work, she says, "And yet I hoped." Okay? So if someone is in a place where they feel that they simply cannot cultivate a sense of hope, I believe that the best next step could be for them to read the work of people who also were in that place, right? Like, Frederick Douglass writes very openly about being suicidal, okay? He writes about that in his work, in his autobiography. And so if we can read the stories of other people who made it through, then I think that we ourselves can also believe that there's something worth living for in the end.
My God. Now that was emotional for me,
Mm.
thinking about even the work of so many people. And I think all of us, maybe some more severe than some, have been in these places of hopelessness. We've all felt it. We've all experienced it in different forms and in different manners. And so, Dr. Goodwill, from someone who's a professor who interacts with students and
Mhm.
all walks of life, what is one message that you would say to the world right now, where you would say to the world, like, in a place of like, okay, things are still they're not getting better in in some senses, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is one takeaway that you would say if Dr. Goodwill was going to write a book about?
Mhm.
What would that one takeaway be?
I would say harness the wisdom and insights from history. We are not the first people to experience crisis, hardship, difficulty, great sorrow, suffering, and pain. We're not the first, and we won't be the last. And depending on where someone grew up, the context in which they grew up, they may or may not have been exposed to different people throughout history, or maybe the works of different authors across different genres. But if we can harness the wisdom and insight that's already been made available to us, then I know that we can endure. I know it. I know it. So one of my personal heroes is Ida B. Wells Barnett. She's most commonly recognized as an investigative journalist, but I really see her work as being like a prophetic call to courage and to boldness. Because when it was easier to be quiet, she spoke up. When it was easier to withdraw, she put herself on the line. Her stature was small, but her contributions have been enormous. She wrote about the atrocities of lynching in a time where she herself was threatened with lynching. Okay? Most of us in this day are not going to be threatened with lynching. We might lose an opportunity. Somebody might not like us. We might lose some money, right? But we're not going to be threatened with lynching. And yet she still spoke up and told the truth. And so I think if we can harness the wisdom and insights from history and from maybe our unsung heroes, she was considered radical, and so I feel like maybe her story is not always taught in schools across the country. She was in Chicago, so I think Chicago does have a greater focus on her, but across the country, people probably don't focus on her as much as they should. But if we can read the words of people who've already been through it, friends, then their words, I believe, will give us enough strength and courage to persevere and to persist in this time. They've been through it, and we can get through it too.
Now, that's a quote. They've been through it and we can get through it too.
Yes.
I think that is just so profound because often, Janelle, Dr. Goodwill, and I'm going back between her names because I also have a personal relationship here. But, I think so many times that many people don't read history, right? Because
Yep.
reading has just become kind of the last thing that we do, right? And I feel like it's so profound to be able to say, go back and read the work of people who've
Yes.
gone before you.
Yes.
Go back, and even if it's just listening to those words, right? Go back and do that, because often it's to say that you are not in the struggle alone. It is to say
No.
that you are not by yourself. It is
You're
to say
not.
that you're not
Mm-mm.
the lone wolf in the corner. It is to say that you are not uniquely suffering in that way. Circumstance could be unique in some degree, but your existence in itself is not unique. And I love what some of the astronauts just said who went to NASA, who went to space recently, and looking at the Earth from space, and their discovery of how unique we were, that
Hmm.
how the Earth has been uniquely placed in the universe, and how each one of us were uniquely created for such a time as this.
Mhm.
And I'm so inspired, Dr. Goodwill, by the work you've done.
Thank
I
you.
know it's been hard work, because I
Mhm.
have seen this work almost a decade now. I've seen you pour your heart and soul into not only providing a space for meaning for others, but also you've researched this, you've gone through
Mhm.
it your own self. And I know your story. You guys haven't gotten a chance to hear her story, but man, this girl got a story, okay? I love that, because when you see her, you see hope, you see the light. But I know she is not here just because of her just skirting through life without suffering. She suffered.
Mm.
And I think her suffering has also been a mandate, right, for the work that she does. And
Mhm.
I know how many women, how many people are impacted by your research and your work. And so it is an honor and privilege that we got to experience that work today. It's just a service, you guys. It's just touching on the surface, but what an honor for me again to have done this with you. I want to thank you all for showing up and for being present with us and for being open. And also, we hope you leave here a new person. You leave here with a sense of meaning and hope. And so thank you, Dr. Goodwill, again for joining us.